and welcome. You are watching The Leadership Factory, a space where we explore practical, research-driven insights that help leaders think clearly, lead wisely, and build healthier organizations. Today, we're diving into a powerful leadership reality many people don't like to talk about, and it is titled Leadership Without Ownership is Why Nothing Gets Done. Leadership without ownership is why nothing gets done. Now, I want you to picture this in your mind. Picture this in your mind. You are in a leadership retreat. The room is calm, almost too calm. The strategy is clear. The priorities are aligned. The vision, very compelling. On paper, everything looks flawless. But yet, nothing is moving. Nothing works. And here in the room is the CEO standing by the window, looking out over the city, and he says something that lands without uncomfortable precision. Everyone agrees on the direction, but somehow nothing is moving. If you have ever led a team, you recognize that moment as a leader because it reveals a truth many leaders sense but rarely articulate. Alignment without ownership is merely agreement. An agreement, no matter how enthusiastic, does not build organizations. Ownership does. In our previous episodes, we explored how clarity and alignment accelerate teams. But now, let's be more precise. Alignment is only the starting point. The real leadership work begins after alignment. And that work is accountability. Now, not the version of accountability that feels punitive, driven by blame, by pressure or control, but a more demanding, more developmental form of accountability, where individuals can say without hesitation, this is mine, this job is mine, this task is mine. Until that shift happens, progress remains fragile and execution remains optional. And here is where many organizations struggle. Accountability has become one of the most misunderstood disciplines in leadership. Some leaders equate it with pressure, others with surveillance, some associate it with consequences, and many avoid it entirely because they fear it will damage trust or morale. But the data is telling. Research from Gallup consistently shows that fewer than half of employees strongly agree they know what they are truly accountable for at work. Even fewer believe accountability is applied fairly. And when that happens, the outcomes are predictable. They are very predictable. For example, good intentions on even performance. More importantly, delayed decisions and a quiet form of resentment that slowly erodes culture from within the organization. So let's reframe it clearly. True accountability is not enforced, it is cultivated. It begins with something deeper than job descriptions or KPIs. It begins with psychological ownership. When people feel emotionally connected to outcomes, something shifts. They don't wait to be told what to do. They anticipate problems. They self-correct before being corrected. They protect standards even when no one is watching. Ownership transforms compliance into commitment and obligation into a sense of pride. Now, let me ground this with a real-life example so that you can relate. A manufacturing executive in East Africa inherited an organization that looked strong on the surface. The strategy was clear, meetings were robust, communication was consistent. But performance? Underwhelming. Deadlines kept slipping. Quality issues persisted. Now, most leaders in that situation will respond with more control measures, more pressure, more tighter oversight. But he did something very different. He changed one leadership habit. In every review, he stopped asking the question, who is responsible for this task? And he started asking, who owns the outcome of this task? Who owns the outcome of this task? Because, as he explained, responsibility is about task. Ownership is about stewardship and identity. Within 6 months, rework and corrections declined. Engagement increased, and teams began holding themselves accountable without escalation. That's the power of ownership. Now, here is the critical leadership insight I want you to get from this conversation. Leadership sets the tone for ownership by what it reinforces. Let's make this practical again. When leaders rescue teams too quickly, they weaken accountability. When they tolerate vague commitment, they normalize drift. When they reward busyness instead of outcomes, they confuse activity with ownership. And over time, teams learn something very specific. Now, what leaders say matters, but what leaders consistently follow up on. You see, accountability thrives in very specific conditions, where expectations are explicit, where feedback is timely, and where follow-through is non-negotiable. And importantly, it is not sustained by fear, I must warn. It is sustained by fairness and consistency, not fear. People rise to standards when they believe those standards apply equally to everyone, including leadership. But the moment accountability feels selective or political, trust erodes quickly. Trust erodes quickly. And now let's be honest about the real challenge here. Most leaders, accountability is not a technical issue for most leaders. It is an emotional one. Because holding people accountable requires courage, patience, and emotional regulation. Yes, it requires difficult conversations. It requires staying present when there is resistance, discomfort, or even pushback. And many leaders avoid that. But avoidance comes at a cost, because teams always learn what leaders are willing to tolerate. And over time, tolerance becomes a culture, a workplace culture. There's another layer to this, and that layer is this. Ownership cannot exist in a system where leaders themselves avoid accountability. Leaders who deflect responsibility weaken their own credibility. Leaders who acknowledge missteps strengthen it. When accountability flows upwards as well as downward, trust deepens, performance stabilizes, and alignment becomes durable. Because here's the reality. Teams mirror what leadership practices, not what it preaches. So let's bring this back to you as a leader. I want you to reflect on 3 questions this week. And I want you to answer those questions honestly. Where have I mistaken alignment for ownership? What outcome do I care deeply about, but I've not clearly transferred ownership for? And how often do I follow up on commitment with curiosity and clarity rather than control or silence? Let's also correct a common misconception. Accountability is not micromanagement. It is not hovering. It is not control. Accountability is clarity, reading, and trust. Very important. The most resilient teams operate with shared accountability, especially when trust exists, where peers hold peers to standards, not because they have to, but because those standards actually mean something to everyone in the organization. And in those environments, leaders don't chase performance. Why? Because everyone is holding each other to accountability. Then performance emerges. Now, as the year progresses into halftime, many leaders feel the instinct to push harder, to demand more, to accelerate results. Yes, the pressure is there. But often, the more effective part is not to push. It is to pause and recalibrate ownership. Because when people know exactly what they own and why it matters, momentum follows naturally. A seasoned business leader once said something to me in a very simple language. He said, alignment tells us where we are going. Ownership determines whether we actually get there. That distinction, that's the difference. That's the difference between aspirational leadership and effective leadership. So here's your practical focus for this week. If you've been listening to me for a while, you know I give assignments every week. Now, before this week ends, identify one critical outcome your team must deliver before half of the year. Have a direct conversation. Ask one simple question. Who owns this? And what does success look like? Then do something equally important. Step back. Step back. Stay engaged, even though you step back, but don't interfere. Let ownership do the heavy lifting. Because the moment responsibility becomes personal, performance becomes inevitable. This is the ownership shift. Lead it deliberately. Now, thank you for spending this time with me. I am Dr. Emmanuel Toye Shubande. I'm a strategic leadership expert, executive coach, and award-winning author. Now, I want you to remember this. Leadership is not just about making decisions. It is about creating an environment where truth can be heard, trust can grow, and people can thrive. If this conversation resonates with you, I would love to hear your reflections, perhaps your questions. You can connect with me at contactme@toyeshubande.com. And stay tuned. Stay tuned because in our next episode, we will continue exploring the deeper human realities that shape leadership effectiveness. Until then, keep leading with clarity, courage, and wisdom. Thank you. Bye-bye.